Hey, this is Harold from Giant Loop, and today we're going to talk about how to mount up the new Round the World Panniers, which are specifically designed to be hardware mounted to side luggage racks that are flat and vertical in design. There are many variations on how to mount the bags, but so today we're going to cover the basic installation using the relatively universal mounting hardware we have available to go with the Round the World Panniers. When you get the panniers, and after you've had the chance to drape them over the bike and get a sense for how you want to position them, one of the first things you're going to want to do is pull out the included frame sheet. So there's a flap inside. You just reach in, grab it by the base, pull the velcro loose, and remove the frame sheet. So before we dive in, we've organized everything that we're going to need for the installation here. We've got a pencil to mark locations. We've trimmed out our fitting template. We have our instructions here ready to go. We have a 13 millimeter socket for the Happy Trails hardware that we're using in our example today. Your actual, sizes may vary according to your rack manufacturer's mounting hardware. We have tape to affix the template to our frame sheets. Our frame sheets have been pulled out of the panniers and are ready to go. Here's all our mounting hardware, and we have a couple of clamps that are going to come into play here a couple steps into the process. So one of the first things that we recommend doing when you receive your Round the World Panniers is using the included crossover straps to do kind of a dry fit on your bike and luggage rack system and get a sense for how they're going to fit, where you might want to position them, and any fit considerations. For example, if you're carrying a passenger, you want to ensure that there's enough heel space behind the passenger peg so that the passenger isn't right up against the pannier, which means you might shift the mount back slightly. But just take a minute or two to become familiar with how they're going to fit before you start drilling holes and so on. So when you get your panniers, you'll have the 3 included crossover straps, and they are for fitment on the bike. Once you have your hardware mounts on the bike, you no longer need them, and they just can simply be unthreaded from the buckles. You can keep them with you and use them to connect the panniers together if you're carrying them off the bike. You can also, if you don't want the buckles and once they're set up, you really don't need any of that crossover. You can even cut and then singe the ends to keep them from fraying right here. On our testing, we've just left the buckles there. They don't really have any impact on riding. So it's worth noting that the panniers can actually be mounted with either end facing forward. So at the moment we have the drawstring pocket facing forward. We could flip them around and put the drawstring pocket on the back of the bike. So you have a choice if you have a preference. We've already trimmed out the included fit template, and now we're going to tape it to the frame sheet. So we have it all lined up with a frame sheet, and we're just going to tape it in place so we can do our fitting on the rack. So now it's taped, it won't move. We can, in fact, supplement it here a little bit just to make extra sure that everything stays lined up as we mark our drill hole locations. So when you're doing the dry fitting with the crossover straps, you can also measure from the inside edge of the rack to the bottom edge of the frame sheet here to get an approximation of how high you will be positioning the frame sheet on the bike. So you can see here from our dry fitting, we determined that it's 2.5 inches from the bottom edge of the panniers, which lines up here with the frame sheet, to the top edge of our luggage frame. So we've marked that so that we have one solid reference point before we begin marking the other locations for our hardware. So we can line that red line up here with the edge of the rack, like so, and we want to make sure that we're keeping our drill locations that we're going to be marking here clear of this gray zone that's shaded in on the edge of our template. So we've got our reference point lined up. It looks like we're out of the gray on all sides here. So now we can trace the shape of the rack onto our template, like so. And I'm kind of just doing it somewhat roughly because we can test and confirm here once we have our basic locations marked, like so. So now that we have our rack position kind of roughed in on our template, we're going to start by marking the holes for the bottom mounts first, because these are the mounts that remain in a fixed position so you can hook the panniers on and then just tighten the tops. So generally speaking, you want to position these in such a way that they're the maximum width apart without starting to get into the radius corners of your rack or any other obvious obstacles like that. So once we have marked here our rack location, that red line, we can line up the spacer on the mounting hardware with that red line. Then we're just using a small drill bit or a punch to mark our hole location. So there's our hole now marked on the template, and we're going to do the same thing here. In fact, you can use these grid lines to help you get everything squared up. So this hole lines up with one of these grid lines. This hole should line up pretty close to this grid line. So there are our two drill hole locations marked on the template. Now that we've marked our drill hole locations on our template, we're going to go ahead and drill right through the frame sheet here so that we can do our lower hardware mounts and install them on our template. With our holes drilled in our template, now we're going to put our mounting hardware onto the template and get it secured on here and take it over to the bike and the rack to confirm our fit. With our bottom hardware mounts on the template, we can make sure that everything's lining up the way that we like it. If it's not, by the way, it's not a big deal to drill another set of holes if you need to re-drill. Just try to position them in such a way that there's enough material in between the two holes. But so if these aren't right, make any adjustments that are necessary. But if it's looking pretty good and we're all clear of the gray zone here, then we can go ahead and mark the locations for our top hardware mounts. Now that we've got our lower hardware mounts installed and we're liking the fit and position, we're going to mark the locations for our upper hardware mounts. And there are a few different ways that it can be done depending on your rack style and preference. They can catch the top edge of the rack tubing. You can catch the side of the rack tubing. You can do the corners as well, but then it becomes a really critical fit. It's not as forgiving. So for this go around, we're going to mark them so that the hardware is connecting to the top tubing here. And we will use You want to make sure that these are seated completely, the bottoms are completely pushed down on the rack and seated before you mark your locations. We're going to use a drill bit. You could use a punch or some other small tool to just reach in here and mark our hole location. And then we're going to do the same thing over here on the other corner, making sure that we're clear of any obstacles. Like this rack has a couple crossbars, for example, so you don't want the hardware lining up with the crossbars. You want it to be in the clear zone. So that's looking like a pretty good location right there between the weld and the radius corner. In this spot, I can't really reach in with the drill bit, so instead I would trace the outside edge and then mark my hole location at the workbench. We've marked the locations for our top hardware mounts, so now we will drill them into the frame sheet. And we will put our top hardware mounts on and just confirm fit before we transfer the marks to the other frame sheet for the other side. Installing our top hardware mounts so we can confirm our final fit here. And the top ones we don't make super tight because we want them to spin into place. Let's check out the fit on the rack now. So we've removed the template here and we're just doing our final fit confirmation, making sure that we're liking the locations of all of our hardware. It looks like it's going to work great. In this case, we've mounted it pretty far to the rear of the bike to leave plenty of room for the passenger's heel. So the next step is to transfer this to the other frame sheet for the other side. Most luggage racks are symmetrical from side to side, but if yours are not, then you'll need to repeat these steps that we've gone through on one side on the opposite side. If they are symmetrical, you can shortcut by transferring the drill holes to the other frame sheet by getting them carefully lined up and then holding them in place with some clamps and drilling through using the first frame sheet as your template. With the mounting hardware holes drilled in both of our frame sheets, now we're going to transfer those holes to the panniers themselves. So we're taking our frame sheet, we're making sure that it's lining up the correct way that we want it to. So we had drilled our holes so that the pannier would sit slightly to the rear of the bike, giving the passenger plenty of room. So we want to make sure this set of holes that's closer to the edge is fitting into the front of the saddlebag. And in this case, we've decided to put the drawstring pocket on facing forward. So I will put the frame sheet back in place inside the pannier and secure it with the velcroed flap inside. And once it's in place there, then we will feel through the vinyl here to mark our hole locations. So with our drilled frame sheet in the pocket inside now, we're going to mark the locations of our holes, and you can feel them by pressing the fabric in. And in fact, if you kind of rub it around a little bit, it leaves an outline of the hole. And then you can take a pen and we're just going to mark the centers of our 4 holes on the wheel side of the panniers. With a hot soldering iron now, we're going to burn through the locations that we've marked on the outside of the bag, while making sure that the inside flap is held up and out of the way and that you're not melting anything as the hot tip goes through the pannier. We're using heat because it cauterizes the hole and keeps it from fraying. So in a well-ventilated area, we've used the hot soldering iron to melt our holes through the wheel side of the pannier. So now all we have to do is insert our frame sheet, install the hardware, and they should mount right up onto the luggage rack. So for the ease of test fitting, we use the knobs on both the top and bottom when we were doing our test fitting on the first frame sheet. But for the final installation, you want to remember to use the knobs on the top and the fixed hardware on the bottom. So with this Happy Trails hardware, it's the bolts and washers go on the bottom, the knobs go on the top. On the Touratech hardware, they have fixed pucks on the bottom and the two knurled machined metal discs on the top. We've got our hardware all installed now, so let's fit them on the luggage racks. They should be all ready to go. You hook the fixed mounts on the bottom of the luggage rack, and holding the flaps out of the way, we'll want to get everything positioned just where we want it. Rotate the top mounts so they're catching the edge of the rack, like so. And then we're going to reach inside the bag and tighten down the knobs on the tops to secure the panniers to the frames. Remember that the mounting hardware isn't included with the Round the World Panniers, and we do that so that you can select the hardware that's going to work best for your rack and your rack system. So either use the hardware supplied by your rack manufacturer, and again, for optimal fitment, a flat vertical side luggage rack works best and requires the least amount of modification or adapter plates or that sort of thing. Or on our website, you'll find we're offering the Touratech Mounting Puck system, which fits all the Touratech racks grade as well as most round tubular racks with an 18mm tubing diameter. We also offer the Happy Trails mounting hardware, which fits a variety of racks and tubing diameters from 18mm, I believe, down to about 15mm. But you'll find all those details at giantloopmoto.com. And we sure appreciate you tuning in and choosing Giant Loop for all of your adventures.